Dan Morgenstern is not just a hero to everybody who loves this music, but he's also somebody who has firsthand stories. And he's one of the two people I know on the planet, the other being Mike Lipskin, who actually saw Don Lambert. So do tell.
Well, I first encountered Don at a place called Wallace's, which was a bar, neighborhood bar in New Jersey. Totally, like a working class neighborhood. For some reason or other, the owner was somebody who liked music. There were two pianos there, both of them in pretty bad shape and never really tuned. And he loved Don, and Don was there just, playing the piano. People who frequented, Mike Lipskin was someone who knew this, and there were a few other, there were some musician friends of his, there was someone, Dick Wellstead knew about it. They were the ones who told me, and so I went there to see him. And the people who frequented the bar, I mean, I don't think they had any particular idea of, how great a piano player this was, but they all liked him, and he played requests, and he had this thing where he would play two different tunes, one in each hand, and the people really liked that. And he was a very unpretentious man who had notably declined. He didn't, earlier mentioned the Cafe Society. They wanted him, and he was actually scheduled to open there, but he never showed up. He just decided to stay home. He really was disinclined to be in the public eye. I don't know why. He was somewhat shy, but he wasn't, he wasn't handicapped. He didn't have any, he was a nice looking man, but he was just, so the one exception to that, the notable exception, was when he came to Newport and he shared an afternoon of piano players with Eubie Blake and Willie the Lion Smith. And of course, he wasted both of them. And Eubie didn't mind this at all, but Willie did, and Willie was competitive, and they were more alike than what Eubie did was somewhat different. Eubie was amazing, just huge hands that he had. Anyway, I noticed I was sitting pretty close. It was a nice afternoon in Newport, and while Lambert played, Eubie had, he was an interesting guy. Eubie kept nudging Willie, and Willie didn't like that at all. So Don was totally mad. Dick Wellstead, who was one of my very close friends. I loved Dick, and losing him was, it was tragic. He left us much too early, but he, really understood Lambert, and he did beautiful liner notes to a Storyville CD, which is really the main thing that we have of Lambert. Rudy Blush recorded Lambert, and Rudy was another one who, knew piano players. Needless to say, he wrote a book about ragtime. You should have stopped at that, and the Shining Trumpets is a terrible, let me not get into that. That's terrible.
Well, what I will say is the first Lambert I heard was that LP that Rudy made, where he's accompanied rather well and discreetly by a fellow named Howard Kedison playing drums, and it sounds extraordinary.
Howard was one of the guys. I met him at Wallace's. He hung out a while. He played with Don there. Yeah. I don't know much of what else he did. I think Mike Lipskin would know more about him than I do. But he was a nice fellow. Yeah.
Mike is one of my most devoted friends and readers, so Mike will write in and comment. So let's see what we're doing. We could talk about one more person. So what else do you remember about Willie the Lion?
Oh, Willie was such a character. I really got to know and see a lot of Willie when there was a place in Greenwich Village that physically still exists, but has absolutely nothing to do with jazz anymore, called the Riviera. It's on 7th Avenue South, and you've walked by there many times. It's a not particularly interesting, place for, you can have coffee there, and it's like an Italian restaurant, but they had a back room, which for a while was a jazz room. They had a piano there, and Art Hovis is the one, I think, who started it. And that's whom I first saw there was Art. And then they brought in Willie. And then after Willie, they had a name list. I can't even remember his name. It was a very nice, younger, blind piano player. We knew him as Blind Eddie. It's a pity that I should know his last name because he was good. And people would come and sit in. So, especially after the Central Plaza Stuyvesant sessions, I remember once, I've written about this, but came there with Hot Lips Page after a Central Plaza session, and Lips just sat down. It was a nice little back room. It was very cozy, and he just sat down and pulled out the horn and played some, but then he sang the blues for about what seemed like half an hour, never repeating any stanzas. No, but that was where I got to know Willie. And if you wanted to buy Willie a drink, he said, well, what would you like? He said, brandy, brandy. That was what he liked. And Willie was full of stories, and he also, his calling card had on in Yiddish, but in Hebrew letters. It's a Hebrew cantor, and he knew Yiddish. And I wish somebody had recorded that. And I wish at the time that there had been this portable recording equipment stuff that you could use. But he had his own Yiddish lyrics to "I Found a New Baby." It was like, "Ich habe ein neues Fegel" or something like that. I wish I had the whole thing. And it was flawless because somebody I should mention, because he was I have written about him, but probably not enough. He was my mentor. It was through him indirectly that I met Gene Falos, who introduced me to Louis and all that. That was little NAT LORBER, who was a trumpet player, and a protege of Lips's, and later on also of Roy Eldridge. Lips called him Shorty, which in his Texas accent came out Shorty, because Lips wasn't very tall, but Nat was shorter than he was. And Roy called him Space Cadet. But Nat was a very interesting and kind of unique phenomenon. But he spoke Yiddish. That was like he grew up speaking Yiddish. His father was a garment cutter, so they spoke Yiddish at home. So he knew. He said Willie was perfect. Willie's Yiddish was flawless.
How did you meet Nat?
I met Nat. I guess maybe I met him on 52nd Street. There was a Nidix on the old-timers will remember there was a chain in New York called Nidix. They were famous for, I think they had a 5-cent orange drink, and they had a combination at the time for 15 cents you could get a hot dog and an orange drink. So they were on the corner of 52nd and 6th. And there was a place where the musicians who worked on 52nd Street, they would hang just to get a cold drink or get a hot dog or something. Most of the joints didn't have any food. They had drinks, but they didn't have food. So that's where I met Nat, and we became fast friends. And he was a Louis nut. He loved Armstrong. But he also was a good trumpet player. He had studied briefly with Charles Colin, who was a well-known trumpet teacher, but he never really learned to read music, and he was a natural, and he had a beautiful big sound, and he was not the greatest on complicated changes, but he was fine on blues and like a rhythm stuff, and musicians liked him. I mean, he sat in, Lester Young had him sit in, even Paul Quinochet, even Buddy Rich had a little trio somewhere. You know how Buddy was, you know, but they all tolerated Nat, even though he was, like I said, you know, he would be imperfect on the changes. Dick Webster wrote something he wanted. Dick was a great writer. I'm trying to find somebody who collected almost everything that he wrote, and I would like to see it published. But he had something about, he mentioned that in passing. He said something about Professor Lorber's theory of harmonic change. But you know who loved him was Buddy Tate, and Buddy would actually, he was one of the few people who would hire Nat. He would, when Buddy had a band at the Celebrity Club in Harlem, which was a place that wasn't really a neighborhood. It was a place that catered to special occasions, birthdays, weddings, whatnot, everything. So that was its main business. But Buddy had a band there for a long time, and he's one of the few people I know who actually hired Nat and paid him, you know. He also had a relationship for a while with a very nice African-American female pianist who worked at Arthur's Tavern in the village. She had a...
Mabel Godwin?
No, it wasn't her. She preceded him.
Okay.
So they became a couple, and she had that work. That was the steadiest gig I ever knew him to have, which lasted for quite a while. Then her mother became ill, and she was from somewhere down south. She had to leave New York and go, and that was like a big tragedy in Nat's life. But he was, I've called him my Virgil. He said he introduced me to, to Hopkins Page, everybody. He introduced me to Harlem, although it was a girl I met and got friendly with, who was the first to take me to the Apollo. And the first time I went to the Apollo, lo and behold, it was Dizzy's big band with Shannon Pozo on drums. So that was an amazing experience. Where did all this start?
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. So I'm going to pause for a minute, though.